Hello. For those of you tuning in, I really appreciate it. You are listening to the next episode of Autism Athletics. So today we are going to talk about the college football preseason poll, the top 25. So first we're going to start with how the polls work. So there is the coaches poll, the AP poll, and the college football playoff poll. The most important one is the college football playoff poll, which comes later in the season. It comes around October, and that's when the committee who decides who's in the college football playoff, they'll make their own top 25 rankings, and they'll come together and discuss it. And then you've got the AP poll, which is the second most important one. It stands for Associated Press. These are the rankings that you can look at in the preseason, and you can look at them at the end of the season and during the season before the college football playoff polls. And you might be wondering, how does it work? Well, they choose, I think, 62 people, and they all will submit their own top 25, and then they will compile those all into one. So today, I'm going to give you my takeaways from the top 20, my key takeaways. I'm not going to break down every team because that could take forever. But let me start by reading off the teams. Sorry if I'm looking down. At one we have Texas. At 2 we have Penn State. At 3 we have Ohio State. At 4 we have Clemson. At 5 we have Georgia. At 6 we have Notre Dame. 7 we have Oregon. 8 we have Alabama. At 9 we have LSU. At 10 we have Miami. At 11 we have Arizona State. At 12 we have Illinois. At 13 we have South Carolina. At 14 we have Michigan. At 15 we have Florida. At 16 we have SMU. At 17 we have Kansas State. At 18 we have Oklahoma. At 19 we have Texas A&M. At 20 we have Indiana. At 21 we have Ole Miss. At 22 we have Iowa State. At 23 we have Texas Tech. At 24 we have Tennessee. And at 25 we have Boise State. Now, underneath the AP poll, you will also see others receiving votes, and those are teams that some people thought should maybe be in the top 25. They got some votes for it, but they weren't good enough to actually make it. So my key takeaways. We'll start with who they have at number 1, Texas, and I totally agree with this. I heard Joel Klatt, who's a famous announcer and has the Joel Klatt show. I heard him say their only weakness is their O-line, and I agree. They return C.J. Baxter back from injury. They get Wisner back at running back. They have an elite defense, and Arch Manning, I think, can be an upgrade at quarterback. Quinn Ewers was good, but he was a little bit inconsistent and dealt with some injuries. Arch Manning, I think, has the highest ceiling, or also known as potential, of any quarterback in college football. He's 6'4", he's fairly mobile, and he's accurate, and he showed flashes when he played last year. The only problem I have with him is that his best SEC competition he played was Mississippi State, but he's got all the potential in the world. And then they lost Matthew Golden and Isaiah Bond at wide receiver, so let's hope they can replace him. They also had a top 5 recruiting class. While a lot of those recruits probably won't play right away, some of them definitely will, especially the 5 stars. Then we'll break down Ohio State versus Penn State. So Penn State, like I said earlier, is number 2, and Ohio State's number 3. I personally think Ohio State should be ranked higher. Penn State is a good team, and they are loaded. Maybe the most loaded team in college football besides Texas, as far as who they return and stuff. But the problem is, when they play the elite teams like the Ohio States and the Oregons of the world and whoever else, they just tend to not play well, and they can't always win those big games. Sure, they beat a couple ranked teams last year, like Indiana and SMU. But when's the last time Indiana and SMU were ranked? I mean, come on. Those were 2 of the weaker teams in the college football playoffs. Outside of maybe Boise State, I think they were probably the 2 weakest teams in the college football. And Ohio State yes, they're breaking in a new quarterback, but Julian Sayin is a 5-star recruit, so you know he's got the talent. And yes, they lost both their running backs, and Trayvon Henderson and Quinshawn Juggins, but they should be good enough there. You know they're going to produce. And then wide receiver, yeah, they lost to Meg Buga, who's on the Bucks, and that's a good situation for him. But that's a whole other topic of conversation. And good for him. Carnell Tate, who's pretty good and could be a good number 2 option, and Jeremiah Smith, who might be the best college football player, and is definitely the best wide receiver in my opinion. He was unbelievable. Had 15 touchdowns, over 1,300 yards, and he was just making crazy one-handed catches and stuff like that. He's got the size at 6'3", and he's got good speed. Like, he's unbelievable. And then Caleb Downs, their safety, might also be the best defender in all of college football. So they might have the best player on each side of the ball. And Ryan Day showed that he actually can be this coach of Ohio State and do a good job, despite some question marks. Even though they lost to Michigan and the Nebraska game was way closer than it should have been, come playoff time, they brought it. they came up when it mattered the most, and Will Howard was even better and better. So you know that they're capable of playing at their best, and you know that they're going to produce at the quarterback position. So let me tell you about my favorite teams. So I like both Georgia and Georgia Tech. I know I can't like both, but it's a house divided. My sister and brother-in-law went to Georgia, and my brother and dad went to Georgia Tech. So that's why I like both. So let's break down Georgia. Georgia does lose their quarterback Carson Beck, who I thought got too much blame. That Georgia did have the most drops last year, which that's got to be corrected. But they do transfer from USC Zachary Branch, and they add another transfer wide receiver in Noah Thomas. Their running game should be good too. Nate Frazier had over 800 yards and 8 touchdowns as a freshman, despite splitting time with Trevor Etienne. And then they have another running back, McCray, who is a transfer from Illinois, who won about 10 games last year, and he had 10 rushing touchdowns. So he should be a good backup. And then they got Robinson at third string, who I think is coming back from injury. And then they return Oscar Delp and Lawson Lucky at tight end, so they should be good there too. Their weapons are way better than last year, so hopefully that'll help Gunnar Stockton. Yes, he's a new starter, but he does have a little bit of experience playing last year. I think he played one game against Notre Dame and like half the game, or maybe even less in the SEC championship game against Texas. So he's got some experience, but not a ton. And he's listed as a dual threat, so hopefully that can help take the Georgia offense to the next level. But when Stetson Bennett had mobility, Georgia was really good. Now that was a different offensive coordinator, but still, they were really good. And defensively, you know they're always going to bring it, and they've got the best coach in Kirby Smart. And then we'll go to my Yellow Jackets, who I think are a sleeper. You can say I'm biased, but they have Haynes King back to the quarterback position, and there's some things you could nitpick about his stat, and I would like to see him more healthy this year. But he is one of the best running quarterbacks in all of college football, having double-digit rushing touchdowns in back-to-back seasons. And I want to say over 700 plus rushing yards in back-to-back seasons. When he came back from injury, he had a shoulder injury, but they would still put him in, and they would run the ball even with him, just because he was that good. And he's shown flashes as a passer. If he can just hone in on his accuracy, which actually was pretty high in completion percentage last year. But especially if he can do it on a more volume number of passes, and he could just get a little more consistent and stay healthy, he can be really, really good. I'm not going to say Heisman good, but he's got all ACC potential. And then they return wide receiver Malik Rutherford, who's solid. They do lose Eric Singleton at wide receiver, which that's going to be a decent loss, and should be a good addition for Auburn. But they return Eric Rivers at wide receiver, who is a transfer. He had over 1,000 yards and double-digit touchdowns. Yes, it was a smaller group of five school, but that's still awesome. And they return running back Jamal Haynes, who is very good. He may not have the craziest numbers, but he's super talented, and I think he could be in for a big year. He's got the speed, he's got the agility. He's really got that, and he's decent at catching out of the backfield. So he could be in for a big year too. Defensively, they're not horrible on that side, but I would like to see more consistency and see them be better. And they do return Kyle Eford at linebacker, who I really like. I think he plays hard, and I think he can make a lot of tackles. No, he's not perfect, but I think he's very good. And hopefully the rest of their defense will play good. I think they lost some people either in their secondary or D-line. I can't remember. And then kicking game's got to be more consistent. Outside of Harrison Bucker, Georgia Tech has never had a consistent. Brent Key has done a good job at Georgia Tech, going 7-6 his first 2 years, which is way better than they ever did under Jeff Collins. Under Jeff Collins, they never won more than, I think, 3 games in a season. And they beat Miami, who was a top 5 team at the time, and finished with 10 wins and was a ranked team at the end of the season and had Cam Ward at quarterback. So that was a really, really good win, and they took Georgia to 8 overtime. Sure, they lost, but they gave them all they could handle. And Haynes King was unbelievable in that game. And they don't have an overly tough schedule. They play 2 ranked teams in Clemson and Georgia, but that's really about it. Now, they do play Colorado in their week 1 matchup at Colorado. So I don't know what to make of Colorado. I could see them being okay. I could also see them being pretty good. They're another hit or miss team. But overall, I do expect Georgia Tech to improve on that win total from the last 2 years. If I had to predict, I would say 8-4, but I don't think 9 wins is out of the question. And I even think there's a small chance they could win 10 games. Now let's go to some teams that I don't agree with their rankings. Is there any I don't agree with? Yes, I will say Indiana. Indiana gets a transfer quarterback in Fernando Mendoza, who I'm just not buying the hype. Maybe it's because I'm a stats guy and I'm nitpicking, but I don't remember Cal being overly great last year either. So I don't really buy the hype on him. And also, when they played any ranked team last year, they lost. they lost. It doesn't matter who it is. Now, they didn't play a ton of ranked teams, and they did a good job against unranked teams, which means they didn't have any bad losses. But I don't know. I personally wouldn't rank them. I just wouldn't. And I think Ole Miss, you could argue they shouldn't be ranked because they did lose their quarterback, Jackson Dart, to the NFL, and they lost a couple of wide receivers, and I think they lost Trey Harris and a couple others. But I get it. They're talented, and apparently their backup quarterback is good. And Lane Kiffin's done a pretty good job at coach. But those are really the only two that I don't have a problem with. And then we'll talk about a couple hit or miss teams. We'll start with LSU. LSU to me is a hit or miss team. When you look at them statistically, they scored about 30 points a game and gave about 25 points a game. Their running game is just kind of average. And while they did have a good recruiting class, I wouldn't say their recruiting class was on par with, like, say, Georgia and Texas and stuff like that, and Ohio State. But they did still have a top 10 recruiting class, so they could be good. And their quarterback, Garrett Nussmeier, who showed Nussmeier was pretty good last year, and I think he has the potential to be really good. I think he's got top 5 NFL draft potential. Now, would I say he's there right now? No. I would probably put him closer to late first round right now. Most people would probably disagree with that. They'd probably still have him closer to top 10, but that's just my honest opinion. And I'm probably just a little nitpicky on his stats, but he also lacks the mobility, and I just would like to see a tad more consistency. Another sleeper I have is Notre Dame. They returned their quarterback, who was really good last year, and their running back. And the triple option can always be tough to stop. If you're a mediocre or bad team, you can forget it. You're not stopping the triple option. Even some good teams might struggle with it. That's why you saw Georgia Tech, when they had Paul Johnson, they would have some quality wins, even if they weren't having the best season. So they're another sleeper. They could be right there with Boise State for the best group of 5 team to make the college football playoffs. Now, Tulane's another good one who could be good, but they lost both their quarterback and their running back. So we'll have to see. Still expect them to be in their conference championship, but we'll have to see how good they are. And then another one that can be hit or miss is Florida. Florida returns DJ Lagway at quarterback, who has a cannon for an arm and has good size at 6'3", and is listed as a dual threat, even though his running stats weren't the best. But his decision-making's got to get better. A 12-9 touchdown to interception ratio is not going to cut it. And we'll have to see if their coach is the right fit. If they don't have a good season, I don't see him staying that long. They got to win minimum 9 games in order for him to keep his job. Maybe I'm overthinking it, but definitely 6 or less wins is not going to have him keep his job. So they're kind of a hit or miss team, and the rest of their team, whether it be running back, receiver, defense, it's just kind of okay. But if DJ Lagway can play to his full potential, they can be super good. There's other teams I could talk about, but those were the teams that I wanted to talk about. I talked about those top teams in Ohio State, Penn State, Texas. I talked about my favorite teams in Georgia and Georgia Tech. Then I talked about a couple of hit or miss teams in LSU and Florida. And then remember, my 2 sleepers were Georgia Tech and Navy. So those, and then a couple others that I didn't love in the top 25, like Ole Miss and Indiana. So those are my top 25 takeaways. You can agree or disagree, but please comment below. I would love that. And I would love to see who you agree with and who you disagree with, and who you think should be ranked higher, who you think should be ranked lower, or who should be in the rankings that isn't. And I can't wait for this college football season. Hope you enjoyed, and I hope you tune into more Autism Athletics episodes.